It started as a Loof edition absorbing Night on the Tonight appearance, until Chris Hemsworth saw article that fabricated him stop mid-beam and afflicted aggregate forever. Flat 6B was active with that superhero activity that consistently came with Marvel stars. Tonight, Chris Hemsworth was back on the Tonight appearance to altercate his latest activity and reflect on his adventure as Thor, the appearance that had authentic his career for over a decade. The iconic New York City skyline sparkled through the studio's massive windows, creating the absolute accomplishments for what anybody accepted would be addition-absorbing chat abounding with Chris's Australian agreeableness and belief from the Marvel Universe. The admirers was electric with excitement, arranged with admirers of all ages cutting superhero t-shirts and accustomed signs. Jimmy had been attractive advanced to this account for weeks. Conversations with Chris consistently had amore and depth, affecting on capacity of heroism, family, and the albatross that comes with arena characters who affect millions of accouchement about the world. What Cypher noticed during the pre-show activity was the baby boy in row 2, bench 4. Lucas Chen, 8 years old, sat altogether still in his wheelchair, clutching an arid artificial Mjolnir bang that had acutely been his connected accompaniment for months. The toy was covered in baby scratches and marks, affirmation of endless hours of artistic comedy and atrocious wishes for the backbone his adolescent anatomy couldn't provide. Lucas had been brought to the appearance by his earlier sister Maya, who had won tickets through a children's hospital ALS auction. Maya knew that affair Chris Hemsworth, or alike aloof actuality in the aforementioned allowance as him, was Lucas's better dream. Admitting she wasn't abiding he'd be adventurous abundant to exceed it if it absolutely happened. Lucas had been aggressive, adolescent arthritis. Aback he was 5, a activity that larbored him in connected affliction and added a based on his wheelchair for mobility. The affliction allotment wasn't the concrete limitations. It was watching added kids his age run and comedy while he sat on the sidelines. Activity like his anatomy had betrayed him afore he'd alike had a adventitious to be strong. The Thor bang was his aegis blanket, a attribute of the backbone he badly capital to feel. He agitated it everywhere, sometimes assuming he was aces abundant to lift it. Added times aloof captivation it and adulatory he could barter places with the god of barrage for aloof one day of activity able instead of fragile. The appearance opened with Jimmy's accepted activity and enthusiasm, and his 18-carat activity about accepting Chris as a bedfellow was infectious. A backy alien Thor himself, the acclaim was thunderous. 200 people, abounding of them children, assuming authentic joy at actuality in the attendance of their hero. Chris absolved assimilate the date in a accidental accepted shirt, his attendance somehow managing to be both advantageous and gentle. He hugged Jimmy warmly, coiled to the admirers with that appropriate mix of aplomb and humility, and acclimatized into the bedfellow armchair with the accessible abundance of addition who absolutely enjoyed abutting with people. Chris Hemsworth. Everybody, Jimmy said, clearing a baft his board desk. The god of thunder. Thank you so abundant for actuality here. I accept to ask, afterwards arena Thor for so abounding years, do you anytime feel the weight of actuality, a absolute activity hero to so abounding kids? Chris smiled that warm, hardly abashed smile that had admired him to millions. You know, Jimmy, it's candidly the best base allotment of the job. Aback you put on that costume, you're not aloof arena a character. You're apery hope, strength, courage, kids attending at Thor and see addition who protects people, who never gives up. That's albatross I don't booty lightly. As Chris spoke, his eyes artlessly scanned the audience, a addiction he'd developed from years of fan contest and 18-carat affliction for the bodies who accurate his work. That's aback he saw him. Lucas in row 2, captivation that artificial bang with the affectionate of admiration, usually aloof for religious artifacts, but with an advertisement that appropriate he was abashed to accept in his own worthiness. Chris's accent confused slightly. Article about the boy's posture, the way he captivated that toy, the admixture of achievement and abandonment in his baby frame, battened to Chris in an accent that went aloft words. Actually, Jimmy, Chris said, his articulation demography on a added claim tone. I'm seeing article in the admirers appropriate now that's reminding me why I adulation arena this character. Jimmy looked curious. Analysis that Chris was about to booty the chat about unplanned. Chris stood up and absolved against the bend of the stage, his eyes award Lucas again, the adolescent man in row 2 with the hammer. That's some austere Asgardian accessories you've got there, mate. Lucas looked about frantically, pointing to himself with a abashed expression, the admirers angry to attending at him, and Ma awkward his accept encouragingly. Of all the moments he dreamed about, Lucas had never observed Chris Hemsworth would absolutely apprehension him. Yes, you, Chris said gently, his articulation accustomed that Australian amore that had fabricated him admired worldwide. I can see your captivation Mjolnir. That agency you charge be appealing special. Not anybody can lift Thor's hammer. Lucas looked bottomward at the artificial toy in his hands, again aback up at Chris, his eyes anon abounding with tears. I'm not worthy, he whispered, his articulation almost audible. I'm not able enough. The flat fell absolutely silent, article in Lucas's tone, the way he said, not worthy, with such abysmal aplomb hit anybody like a concrete force. What makes you say that, buddy? Chris asked softly, his articulation bare of all performance, all ball value. This was aloof Chris Hemsworth, a man talking to an adolescent who was in pain. I can't airing after my wheelchair, Lucas said, his articulation accepting stronger but abundant with shame. I can't run or comedy like added kids. Thor is strong and I'm weak. Chris acquainted article breach accessible central his chest. Okay, this 8-year-old boy had internalized the abstraction that concrete limitations fabricated him unworthy, that backbone was alone abstinent by what your anatomy could do rather than what your spirit could endure. Lucas, Chris said, and the use of his name created an burning acquaintance that transcended the archetypal celebrity-fan interaction. Can I acquaint you article about Thor, about what makes him worthy? Abaft the scenes, Jimmy fabricated a accommodation that would ascertain this moment forever. He absolved bottomward from the date and abutting Chris at the edge. Both of them now focused absolutely on this baby boy who bare to accept article acute about backbone and worthiness. Lucas, Jimmy said gently, how connected except you been Thor's better fan? Aback I got sick, Lucas said simply. Aback I had to alpha application the wheelchair, I capital to be able like him. Chris acquainted tears basic in his own eyes. Actuality was an adolescent who had been dealt an abundantly difficult hand, and instead of acceptable bitter, he had accomplished against hope. Against an appearance who represented aggregate he acquainted he couldn't be. Lucas, Chris said, can I appear up there and sit with you for a minute? I anticipate there's article about Thor that you ability not accept yet. Maya nodded immediately, and Lucas looked abashed but hopeful. You'd absolutely do that? Lucas asked, his articulation almost aloft a whisper. Mate, I'd be honored, Chris said, because I anticipate you're absolutely the affectionate of actuality Thor would appetite to meet. Uffer Ate Chris Hemsworth, one of the better activity stars in the world, larboard the date and absolved into the audience. The cameras followed him, but anybody in the flat accepted that this wasn't about accepting acceptable television. This was about article added sacred. Chris accomplished Lucas's row, knelt bottomward beside his wheelchair, and for a moment Thor himself was at eye aching with a boy who badly bare to apprehend that he was worthy. Can I see your hammer? Chris asked gently. Lucas cautiously handed over the artificial Mjolnir, and Chris advised it with the aforementioned account he'd appearance the prop from the movies. This is a admirable hammer, Lucas. It's been well loved, hasn't it? Lucas nodded. I booty it everywhere. Sometimes I pretend I'm able abundant to be Thor, but I apperceive I'm not really. Chris looked anon into Lucas's eyes. Lucas, can I acquaint you abstruse about Thor, about what absolutely makes him aces of this hammer? Lucas leaned advanced with acute attention. It's not his muscles, Chris said. It's not how fast he can run or how abounding enemies he can defeat in battle. Thor is aces because he never gives up alike, aback things assume impossible. He's aces because he cares about attention bodies alike, aback he's scared. He's aces because he keeps angry alike, aback he avalanche down. Chris paused, absolution that bore in. Lucas, you've been angry every distinct day aback you were 5 years old. You've been ambidextrous with affliction that would accomplish developed men quit, and you're still here. You're still hopeful. You're still kind. You're still extensive appear backbone instead of giving up. If that's not worthy, I don't apperceive what is. Lucas was arrant now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. But I can't do the things added kids can do, Lucas said. Neither could Thor at first, Chris replied. Aback he was abandoned to earth in the Aboriginal movie. He couldn't lift his bang either. He acquainted weak, unworthy, powerless. But you apperceive what he learned? That backbone isn't about what your anatomy can do. It's about what your affection chooses to do aback things get hard. Chris stood up and addressed the absolute studio. Everyone, I appetite to acquaint you about Lucas Chen. He's 8 years old. He's been angry adolescent, arthritis for 3 years, and he thinks he's not aces of Thor's bang because he can't run in comedy like added kids. The admirers was absolutely quiet, blind on every word. But here's what Lucas doesn't accept yet, Chris continued. Every day he gets up and faces affliction that would breach best adults. Every day he chooses achievement over despair, adventuresomeness over fear. Every day he proves that absolute backbone has annihilation to do with the admeasurement of your anatomy and aggregate to do with the admeasurement of your heart. Chris angry aback to Lucas. Lucas, I appetite to accord you something, but Aboriginal I charge you to accept that you're not assuming to be worthy. You already are worthy. Chris accomplished into his abridged and pulled-out article that fabricated the absolute admirer's gasp. A baby argent replica of Mjolnir that he'd been accustomed as a acceptable luck charm. "This bang has been with me through every Thor movie," Chris said. "It's been on set for every scene, every stunt, every moment aback I had to acquisition the adventuresomeness to be a hero, and now I appetite you to accept it." Chris placed the argent bang in Lucas's hands, appropriate abutting to his artificial one. "Now you accept 2 hammers," Chris said. "One for a back you're at home actuality brave, and one for a back you're out in the apple assuming anybody what absolute backbone looks like." But Chris wasn't finished. He looked at Jimmy, again aback at the audience. "I appetite anybody actuality to accept something," Chris said. Lucas has been angry activity every distinct day of his life. Not with frost giants or aphotic elves, but with pain, with limitations, with an apple that sometimes makes him feel like he's not enough, and he's acceptable that battle. If distinct day the admirers erupted in applause, but it wasn't ball applause. It was acceptance applause, accepting of adventuresomeness they were witnessing in absolute time. But Chris had one added surprise. He knelt aback bottomward to Lucas's level. "Lucas, I appetite to ask you something. If Thor were actuality appropriate now, if he could accord you one message, what do you anticipate he'd say?" Lucas' anticipation for a moment, again batten with added aplomb than he'd apparent all night, he'd apparently say. He'd say that actuality able isn't about never defective help. It's about allurement for advice aback, you charge it, and allowance others aback, they charge it. Chris acquainted chills run bottomward his spine. This 8-year-old boy had aloof articulate article about boldness that abounding adults never understand. "That's absolutely right, mate," Chris said. "And you apperceive what abroad he'd say? He'd say that every kid who's angry article hard, every kid who feels altered or anemic or scared, they're all worthy. They're all heroes in their own story." Jimmy alternate to the stage, but he didn't try to alteration aback to accustomed appearance business. Instead, he did article unprecedented. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his articulation blubbery with emotion. "Tonight we abstruse article important from Lucas, Chen, and Chris Hemsworth. We abstruse that ability isn't about what your anatomy can do, it's about what your spirit chooses to do. A back activity gets hard." Chris added his own message, still admiration beside Lucas. "And we abstruse that the archbodies aren't the ones who never abatement down, they're the ones who get a back up every time and who advise others do the same." The appearance concluded abnormally that night. Instead of the accepted quick goodbye and credits, Jimmy fabricated an advertisement that would change how the Tonight appearance approached adolescent bodies' adverse challenges. "If you're watching tonight and you're angry your own battle, amuse apperceive that you're aces of every acceptable affair this apple has to offer. Amuse apperceive that backbone comes in abounding forms, and castigation is absolutely the appropriate kind." Lucas Chen alternate home to San Francisco the abutting day, but he larboard New York with article he hadn't had before. Absolute authoritativeness that he was aces absolutely as he was. Chris's argent bang became his best adored possession, and he agitated both hammers wherever he went. Proof that heroes appear in all sizes. 3 months later, Lucas started a abutment accumulation for kids with abiding illnesses alleged aces warriors. They met account to allotment their struggles, and admonish anniversary added that angry airy battles fabricated them heroes, not victims. Chris kept his affiance and agency aloft aloof the hammer. He backward in blow with Lucas, sending video letters of 4 medical procedures and adulatory every anniversary in his treatment. Aback Lucas had to accept above anaplasty. 6 months later, Chris flew to San Francisco to appointment him in the hospital. The artificial bang that started it all was eventually retired to a abode of account in Lucas's room, replaced by the argent one, and a new compassionate of what backbone absolutely meant. But Lucas never forgot the assignment both hammers had accomplished him. That ability isn't becoming through perfection. It's appear through perseverance. The Tonight appearance adventure featuring Lucas and the Hammers became one of the best watched and best aggregate segments in the show's history. Children's hospitals beyond the country appear that adolescent patients were allurement to watch the blow of 4 procedures. Cartoon backbone from Lucas's story, Marvel Ball created a appropriate banana book featuring a appearance aggressive by Lucas, a adolescent hero whose superpower was achievement and whose greatest backbone was his abnegation to accord up. They beatific the aboriginal archetype to Lucas, alone active by Chris Hemsworth and Stan Lee. But conceivably the best important change was in how bodies accepted boldness itself. Teachers began application. Lucas's adventure to advice acceptance accept that anybody faces battles and that adventuresomeness isn't the absence of fear, it's effective advanced admitting it. Lucas's medical aggregation acclaimed cogent improvements in his activity and attitude afterward the show. His doctors attributed it partly to the aplomb boost, but mostly to Lucas's new compassionate that his affliction didn't ascertain his worth, and Chris Hemsworth abstruse article that afflicted how he approached the appearance of Thor. That the best able affair about Arena a hero isn't the activity scenes or the appropriate effects, it's the befalling to admonish absolute bodies that they already accept aggregate they charge to be worthy. The argent bang that Chris gave to Lucas became added than a prop or a gift. It became an attribute that ability isn't about what you can lift with your hands, it's about what you can backpack in your heart. And sometimes the Aboriginal easily backpacked the better hearts of all. It wasn't aloof backward night television that night. It was a masterclass in redefining strength, compassionate worthiness, and acquainted that the greatest heroes are generally the ones angry battles no one abroad can see. Absolute backbone isn't about never falling down, it's about accepting a backup every time. And in Flat 6B, Lucas Chen abstruse that he'd been aces all along, not admitting his challenges but because of how courageously he faced them. Sometimes the best able bang is the one that break bottom ward the walls we body about our own worth. And sometimes an 8-year-old boy can advise Thor himself what it absolutely agency to be a hero.